presentation of the student survey results from the Cyber Friendly Schools project. In this presentation, I will be discussing who we surveyed, the students' use of technology, the exposure to and perpetration of bullying behaviours and cyberbullying behaviours, the most common of those behaviours, and the impact of the Cyber Friendly Schools project intervention. So we surveyed about 3,000 students in 35 non-government schools, 25 of which were co-education schools in Perth, Western Australia. We recruited the Year 8 cohort in 2010 in those schools, and we surveyed them over 3 years from Year 8 to Year 10. In Year 8, they were surveyed in Term 2, and so they reported on Term 1 behaviours. In Year 9, they were surveyed primarily in Term 3, but also some in Term 4, and they reported on Term 2 behaviours. And in Year 10, likewise, they were recruited in Term 3, and they reported on Term 2 behaviours. And about half of the sample were girls and half boys. The students' access to and use of technology was high. Over 88%, so 88% in Year 8 had their own mobile phone, up to 95%, the green line, in Year 10 had their own mobile phone. The percentages who actually used the internet on their mobile phone increased markedly from Year 8 to Year 10. We have 31% in Year 8 up to 71% in Year 10. Internet access at home was almost the rule, with 98% reporting that in each year. Wireless access at home to the internet was also extremely high, 82% in Year 8 up to 94% in Year 10. We asked the students about their use of the internet in their bedroom, as this would most likely be unsupervised access to the internet. And we have 58% of Year 8 students and 90% of the Year 10 students reporting they use the internet in their bedroom. Over 80% of the students used social media, social networking sites such as Facebook, etc. 83% in Year 8 up to 91% in Year 10. So by Year 10, these students in 2012, these Year 10 students, 71% used the internet on their mobile phone, 90% used the internet in their bedroom, and 91% were using social networking sites or similar social media. So if we then turn to actual exposure to and perpetration of bullying behaviours, and this is bullying behaviours in general, including cyberbullying. If we first concentrate on exposure to those behaviours, we see that within Year 8, the students, 47% of the students reported exposure to cyberbullying behaviours. 33% of those were once or twice in that previous term, 14% every few weeks or more often. The overall percentage in Year 9 was 36%, 26% once or twice a term. And in Year 10, the overall percentage was 30%, 21% once or twice a term, and 9% more frequently. And so if we understand bullying as a repeated behaviour, then we would say that 14% of Year 8s down to 9% of Year 10s were bullied, and that's every few weeks or more often. The percentages for perpetration then are, as expected, are lower, and we have overall 23% of Year 8 students reporting that they bullied another student in the previous term, 19% of the Year 9s and 14% of the Year 10s. And so between 2 and 3% of the students reported bullying another student in the previous term, every few weeks or more often. Apart from the general question asking students how often they had been bullied or bullied others, we also gave them a series of questions on the different ways in which students may be bullied and asked how frequently those had occurred. And so from those responses, we can see which forms of bullying are the most common. And you can see that the verbal bullying is the most common, with being teased in nasty ways and called names in nasty ways being most frequently reported. This is followed by more indirect forms of bullying, such as their secrets being told to others to harm them, being excluded from groups, not allowed to join in, lies told or rumours spread about them to damage their social standing, and people trying to break up their friendships. Physical bullying was the least common form of bullying within these year levels. And you can see again how the percentages drop from year 8 to year 10, so from the blue year 8 lines to the lesser frequencies, relatively lesser frequencies in year 9 and year 10. If we then look at cyberbullying behaviours and exposure to those, overall we have 21% of year 8s, 19% of year 9s and 18% of year 10s reporting that they were cyberbullied at least once in the previous term, and so between 5 and 6% had exposure to these behaviours every few weeks or more often. Perpetration numbers, percentages fairly low according to the self-report by the students, so between 6 and 9% of students reporting they had cyberbullied another student in the previous term. Similarly to the general bullying questions, we asked a series of 11 questions asking them about different ways in which they might have been cyberbullied or cyberbullied others. And from those responses, we were able to identify the most common forms of cyberbullying, which correspond to those of the general bullying, which is, so for example, these first two most common ones are similar to verbal bullying, as in nasty messages being posted while chatting on the internet, or nasty or threatening comments on social networking sites or other websites. Again, the exclusion or being deliberately ignored features quite high, and nasty texts and calls on mobile phones. And these forms of bullying were most common for both for exposure to cyberbullying and perpetration of cyberbullying behaviours. So if we turn then to the impact of the Cyber Friendly Schools project intervention, if we took the 11 questions which asked about the different types of cyberbullying, and we used those to categorize students as firstly involved or not involved in cyberbullying. So if they had been exposed to at least one behavior on one occasion, then they were categorized as involved, versus not involved. None of these things had happened to them, or they had perpetrated none of them. And then we could look at, for those students who were involved, the extent of that involvement in terms of the frequency with which those bullying behaviours occurred, or the numbers of different ways in which the cyberbullying behaviours were perpetrated. And so we test for differences both in terms of students' involvement, yes, no, in cyberbullying behaviours, both as in terms of exposure and perpetration, and then for those involved, the extent of that involvement. And we compared results from Phase 1 and Phase 2 schools, where the Phase 1 schools were the ones who implemented the cyber-friendly schools intervention in Year 8, and the Phase 2 schools had not implemented the intervention during the period of the data collection. And we found effects regarding the odds of involvement in bullying behaviour, but not in terms of the extent of that involvement. So if we look at the trends over time, but in the first instance in terms of exposure to cyberbullying behaviours, and then in terms of perpetration of those behaviours, we have here in the yellow line the Phase 1 schools, the blue line the Phase 2 schools. And so you can see that for the Phase 1 schools, we have a drop from 30% to 25% from Year 8 to Year 9 in terms of exposure to cyberbullying behaviours, compared to percentages of 27% to 26% in the Phase 2 schools. So a larger decline in the Phase 1 schools from Year 8 to Year 9 in involvement than is the case in the Phase 2 schools. Similarly, for perpetration, we have a drop from 11% to 8% in perpetration of those behaviours in the Phase 1 schools in comparison to percentages of 9% to 10% in the Phase 2 schools. So that's where we are seeing our significant effects. No differences in the trends from Year 9 to Year 10, either in terms of exposure or perpetration of the behaviours. It's important to note that that it may be a consequence, the drop in the phase 1 schools may be a consequence of the relatively higher percentages to start off with within those schools. And this is known as a phenomenon as regression to the mean, which may account for that steeper decline. But given the fact that we randomized the schools to the different phases of the project, that's less likely an explanation, but something that nevertheless needs to be kept in mind. Also note that any effects that were found, the differences in the percentages are quite small. If we then look at other outcomes of interest to the study, when students are bullied, we encourage them as a strategy to reduce harm from bullying to seek help and to speak to someone, preferably an adult. And so we asked the students who were bullied, did they speak to anyone about the bullying? And you can see that between 26 and 35% of the students did not speak to anyone about the bullying. Of those who did speak to someone, they may have spoken to more than one person, so they may have spoken to a parent as well as a friend. You can see less than 20% of the students, 15% in Year 10 and 18% in Year 8, spoke to an adult at their school about the bullying. Less than 10% spoke to a student leader at their school. In Year 8, 35% spoke to a parent and 34% to a friend. So almost equal percentages, parent and friend, whereas in Years 9 and 10, that had dropped, the parent had dropped to only 30%, a small drop there, but a large increase in terms of friend and sibling, 52% in Year 9 and 47% in Year 10. We also asked the students who had been bullied whether, if they had asked an adult at their school for help, whether what had occurred in terms of the bullying, and for between 54 and 58%, things had improved. However, for 40% plus, the situation had not improved. For the bulk of those, the bullying had stayed more or less the same. So the bullying simply continued or initially got better and then it continued. And for between 6 and 9% of students, the bullying actually got worse. And so for the last outcome I'm going to talk about today, in Year 10, we asked the students their responses to witnessing a bullying incident, either face-to-face or online, etc. And this question was not in the earlier surveys, but we were interested to see what the Year 10s were doing. The responses are as they are here. 12% actually joined in the bullying, the least desirable response. 43% watched, followed what was going on. 38% ignored it, 38% walked away. Now remember that the students could choose more than one of these responses. Encouragingly, 59% supported the person being bullied and 63% took positive action, such as speaking to the person who was doing the bullying to try and get them to stop, speaking to an adult or other person to get help for the person being bullied, or contacting the student being bullied to afterward to see if they were all right. So in summary, the Cyber Friendly Schools project intervention was associated with a steeper decline from Year 8 to Year 9 in the odds of being cyberbullied and cyberbullying others. However, we found no differences from Year 9 to Year 10, and there were no differences in the extent of bullying for those who were involved. And so we have found that the Cyber Friendly Schools intervention had small but positive effects, and so shows promise to be able to impact on cyberbullying in schools. Thank you.
Thanks very much for taking the time to hear about the impact of the Cyber Friendly Schools project on the students that we engaged. We'd particularly like to thank Healthway, the West Australian Health Promotion Foundation, who supported the research that I've described here today. And moreover, I'd like to thank all of the 35 schools that were kind enough to allow us to come into their schools on a regular basis to collect information from students and from staff, and also allowing us to train their staff and implement these resources over time. Thank you.